In today's video, I wanted to go through and discuss 3 more side quests featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. These side quests include Enboff's Nord Burial, a journey to an ancient Nordic crypt in search of long-lost treasure. Then there's the Sad Sorcerer. The player comes across a gruesome scene and has an odd chat with the sole survivor. Then lastly, there's Coropoli Seeks Justice. A member of the Urshiliku camp wants revenge for the death of her husband. I'll play through each quest, detailing the story, environments, and NPCs, and then I'll talk about their lore and themes after the fact. As per usual, the facts and information provided are brought to you by the game itself and the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. Beginning with Enboff's Nord Burial, the adventure starts out in the city of Vivec. The player travels to the Telvanni Canton and enters the lower wasteworks. Making your way to the Lizard's Head Tavern, there aren't many NPCs inside of there, but you can find Enboff, the quest giver for this task. Speaking with him, he opens the conversation with a proposition. Buy him a jug of Motst and he'll tell you a little secret. Luckily, you're in a bar, so the barkeep has a whole bunch on her. Purchasing one and bringing it back to Enboff, you can hand him the booze in exchange for some intriguing lore. He begins by saying that the Nordic folk once ruled this land. In the First Era, the sons of someone named Harold Handfree reigned over Tamriel's northern coasts. One of Harold's illegitimate sons, Olmgerd the Outlaw, was laid to rest on his ship in a tomb with all of his belongings, somewhere on the continent. Enboff continues on by bringing up Stormkiss, Olmgerd's legendary battle axe. This mighty enchanted weapon was buried with the son of Harold. The Nord begins to tie everything together by presenting the player with a key. Said key has the word Stormkiss engraved on it. Enboff is old and dying. He doesn't have the strength for a perilous journey. However, he recognizes a true adventurer when he sees one and insists on giving the player this key. According to Skald tellings, Olmgerd's burial site is likely here on Vardenfell. It's believed that the Nordic ruler was brought to a tomb somewhere between the Daedric ruin of Zain Terraris and Tel Brenora. Enboff wishes you luck and sends you on your way. As pointed out by the UESP, there are quite a lot of tombs on this stretch of Azura's coast. For the most part, at least for back in the day, you would have gone through a lot of trial and error to find the proper one. None of the NPCs direct you to the exact location, nor were there any in-game texts to cover it. However, you would have eventually landed on the Morvani ancestral tomb. The first zone of this dungeon is pretty standard for most of Vardenfell's tombs. Burial grounds that are guarded by various forms of undead. There's plenty of minor treasure, including potions, armor, weapons, ingredients, and gems. In one of the locked rooms, you'll even find a scroll along with some jewelry. However, behind another locked, trapped wooden door is where the rest of the adventure continues. Descending down a long, winding staircase, the player eventually hits the entrance to Takushapal, Olmgerd the Outlaw's final resting place. Takushapal has 2 zones to it. The first is pretty incredible. It's a great big open space, and it almost acts like a maze. There are various walls and structures down here that block off access points, so it's up to the player to navigate their way through this section of the dungeon. There are various skeletons down here with you, and they're no stronger than the ones you would have previously fought. After meandering through the area, you'll come across another door. Luckily, this is the final section of the crawl, Takushapal's Sepulchre. On the other side is a small chamber, and it holds the skeletal remains of Olmgerd. At the center of the room is a boat, and within it is the player's reward. There are gems, soul gems, ingredients, potions, and gold. As for Olmgerd's possessions, he's buried with an Imperial Dragon Scale Tower Shield, cuirass, and helmet, a set of ebony bracers, Stormkiss, and a silver spark sword. Stormkiss is a 2-handed Nordic battle axe and has the enchantment of shock damage for 1 to 25 points for 1 second on target. However, the loot doesn't end there. As pointed out by the UESP, there are arguably greater finds hidden in the caverns above. Levitating directly up from the stairs, the player will come across a small nook. Here, there's the unique, heavy armor headpiece, the Daedric Face of God. It has the highest armor rating of all the unenchanted helmets in the game. Beside it is a Daedric warhammer and a chest. The chest contains some books, gold, potions, and a wild viper eye blade. Beyond that, there's some raw ebony located underneath Olmgerd's boat, but that's about it for treasures in Takushapal, and that's it for Enboff's Nord Burial. Now, let's talk a little bit about this quest. For starters, you don't actually need to meet with Enboff in order to begin this mission. You can explore the Marvani ancestral tomb all on your own, and if you have some sort of unlocking spell or are proficient with lockpicks, gaining access to Tekushapal and Tekushapal's sepulcher isn't that hard. Really, Enboff just adds context to what the player discovers down there. Without his little lore lesson, we never would have known that the skeleton belonged to Olmgerd the Outlaw, the illegitimate son of Harold Freehand. Now, scouring the wiki, unfortunately there isn't much information on Olmgerd. However, there's a lot of information on Harold Freehand, aka King Harold. King Harold has played a huge role in Skyrim's lore, as it's said he's the descendant of Ysgramor himself. Harold led the Nordic forces in driving the Snow Elves out of Skyrim for good. He's credited with turning Skyrim into what it is today, an independent state ruled over by the Nords and their specific customs and laws. Rumor has it that he was the one who forged the Jagged Crown. He used the bones and teeth of dragons, and it symbolized his newfound power. During the events of Skyrim, the Jagged Crown is the artifact that both the Imperials and the Stormcloaks want to get their hands on. It helps to further both sides' status, and whoever holds the crown holds the respect of the Nords. It's said that King Harold had 3 sons: Olmgerd the Outlaw, Hjalmar, who was actually Harold's successor, and Vrage, who was Hjalmar's successor. All 4 of the Nords played an important role when it came to driving the Falmer forces out of Skyrim. It's safe to say that Stormkiss has seen its fair share of bloodshed and has come into contact with many different Snow Elves. Up next for quests is the Sad Sorcerer. This one is quite short, yet pretty intriguing. It's also pretty well hidden, as none of the NPCs or in-game texts direct you there. It begins with the player traveling around the West Gash region. By choosing to enter the Palansour dungeon, a cave that's north of the Nissus Egg Mine, you'll come across an interesting sight. Several Daedra are roaming around the chamber, and littered on the ground are corpses stripped of their clothing and belongings. There are 3 scamps and 1 ogrim. Once the threats are eliminated, you can begin to have a look around. The dead and stripped NPCs are smugglers. There appears to be a lot of ingredients on one of the nearby tables. Accompanying it is some kind of recipe book. In the next chamber over, you'll come across more ghastly sights. Skeletal remains that have clearly been tortured and/or sacrificed. Slowly, the picture is starting to come together. However, it all folds into place when you look up at the highest point of Palansour. Behind an old locked gate, there's a living NPC named Inwold. The Breton has also been stripped of most of his clothes, as all he's wearing is a Colovian fur helm and a unique skirt. Chatting with him, he fills you in on what's happened. Inwald, along with the smugglers, summon the Daedra to Palansour. Why exactly isn't stated. Soon though, the Daedra got out of control and slaughtered everyone in there. They force-fed Inwald his dead companions, locked him up, took away his clothes, and made him wear the skirt and hat. In order to leave the cell, Inwald needs a potion of levitation. He says that there are a few of them in the dungeon, and he needs your help to get one. As a reward, he offers up the skirt and hat. He doesn't give much information on the skirt, other than the fact that it's well made and could be worth a lot. As for the hat, he theorizes that one of the scamps was forced to wear it in their pocket realm of Oblivion. Leaving the conversation, you don't have to look too far for a potion. Directly across from the dungeon's entrance, there's a small nook that contains a chest, some scrolls, and 2 potions of Rising Force. If you didn't have a levitation spell, one of them could be used for you to reach Inwold, and the other could be for the Breton. Bringing the bottle back to the sorcerer, he thanks the player for helping him out. He needs a moment to collect himself before he leaves. However, the first order of business is your reward. You have the option to take both the skirt and the hat, to take one and not the other, or to let him keep both articles of clothing. Choosing to decline the reward results in 1 point of reputation for the player. Otherwise, Inwold gladly gives you the skirt and hat, and he promises to never get mixed up with the Daedra again. The extravagant skirt is simply a basic skirt and can be sold for 60 or so gold. The same goes for the Colovian fur helm. It's a light armor headpiece and isn't much different from the others you can find across Vardenfell. With that, thus wraps up the Sad Sorcerer. Now, let's talk a little bit about this quest. As mentioned before, it's a really short mission. There isn't much to it other than defeating a couple of Daedra and freeing an imprisoned, humiliated sorcerer. If anything, it acts more like a secret/hidden quest. It doesn't have a lot of implication on the game's lore or story, but it acts as a fun and entertaining scenario to stumble across. Before, I mentioned that Inwold never stated why the smugglers intended to summon the Daedra. While it's not a fact, it could be assumed that the smugglers were going to use the demonic creatures for their own personal gain. They were likely meant to rob, steal, and kill for the criminals, while also supplying an extra layer of defense if anyone tried to enter Palansour. Of course, as we've all learned through the Mages Guild quest, Helene's Hut, conjuring Daedra is never a good idea. They will always find ways to trick or outsmart you. The smugglers weren't ready for a Daedric rebellion, and as such, were met with gruesome fates. Now, in the main chamber of Palansour, where the corpses of the smugglers are, there's a book called Hanan's Wake. By the book is a whole bunch of ingredients. Hanan's Wake reveals a recipe that, when ingested, causes mass sacrifice. It's an extremely powerful and dangerous concoction. If done properly, one sip can kill a person instantly. It was recorded to have happened at least once in Tamrielic history. Tribes from all around the land gathered at Ashur-nabal-tashpi and successfully brewed the potion. It involves sacrificing slaves and enemies as, quote, blood of traitors is a required ingredient. Almost all of the guests passed on from drinking the solution, and it's said that Mordred Hanan was supplied with companions in the afterlife. However, where the smugglers went wrong is that a lot of the ingredients required come from the Daedra. That's why Inwald summoned the creatures, and that's when things went sour for the smugglers. The Daedra took control of the situation, and that's how things got to where they are now. The final quest for today is Coropoli Seeks Justice. This one begins with the player at the Urshilaku camp on the northeastern shore of Vardenfell. This quest can only be started once the player has reached clan friend status with the tribe. What's more, you can easily be locked out of the mission if you haven't talked to Coropoli before becoming a clan friend. That's what happened to me, as the quest-related dialogue never popped up. However, this can be fixed by adding in the topic via console commands. Coropoli has a hut right beside Zanumu's yurt. Going on inside and speaking with the merchant, she'll ask you to assist her in, quote, a matter of personal vengeance. Taking her up on the request, she explains that her husband was murdered by Zale Sabatamale. Zale is an outcast Ashlander, and her husband's murder was the cause of betrayal. Coropoli wants revenge and asks the player to kill Zale. If you do, she'll award you with her husband's old weapon, the Spirit Spear. She's reluctant to part with it, but believes it's worth it if it means her husband can finally be at rest. As for Zale's whereabouts, rumor has it that he's held up at a place called Alharasaplet on the island of Sheogorath. Coropoli doesn't know much more than that and directs you to Dagon Fell for more information. Departing the Ashlander camp and traveling to Sheogorath, all of the NPCs there say the same thing. They recognize Zale's name and believe that the Alharasaplet camp is located on the southwestern coast of the island. From here, the only way to find it is by good old-fashioned exploration. Alharasaplet is due west of the Draelis Ancestral Tomb and southeast of the Orethi Ancestral Tomb. For the exterior, the player will spot a lone yurt with two NPCs wandering around it. Those NPCs, Shannet and Tibdan, are part of Zale's crew, and getting close to them will result in a fight. Tibdan is a level 9 barbarian, while Shannet is a level 7 archer. Once they've been defeated, the player can move on to Zale's yurt. Inside, you'll find your quest target. Interestingly, Zale isn't hostile towards you. What's more, he doesn't even have any dialogue pertaining to the quest. There's nothing regarding Coropoli, her husband, or the murder. While lore-wise, it's underwhelming, gameplay-wise, Zale's hospitable nature can be used against him. The player can get a couple of cheap shots off and kill the Ashlander rather quickly. He's a level 11 scout and fights using an iron claymore. Once he's been vanquished, there isn't much else to do around the yurt. Returning to the Urshilaku camp and speaking with Coropoli, she thanks the player for avenging her husband and reveals his name, Aranahi. Keeping up her end of the bargain, Coropoli gifts you the Spirit Spear. It's a chitin spear and has the enchantment of Fortify Spear by 10 points for 30 seconds and Restore Fatigue for 10 points for another 30 seconds. With that, thus ends Coropoli Seeks Justice. Now let's talk a little bit about this quest. In the beginning, Coropoli says that her husband, Aranahi, had his Urshilaku hospitality betrayed, which was the result of his murder. As we learn through the main questline, not all Ashlander tribes are so welcoming, and they don't all take kindly to outsiders. In fact, the Urshilaku are up there as the most welcoming tribe, right behind the Zainab. So, more than likely, Zale sought refuge at the Urshilaku camp, and Aranahi took him in. For one reason or another, Zale decided to kill his host. Unfortunately, there's no story-related dialogue between the player and the target, so we'll never know the exact reason. Perhaps it was a disagreement, a robbery, something done out of jealousy, or just a pure evil deed. Coropoli's role in this is also unknown. Whether she was out of the camp at the time or a witness to the murder is anyone's guess. Beyond this, it's hard to pull out any more lore or story-driven elements because there really aren't many trails left behind by Bethesda. Coropoli doesn't share any further information, Zale is a literal NPC with basic dialogue, and there's nothing in the game regarding Aranahi. Other than directing the player to Coropoli when asked about rumors, none of the other Urshilaku touch on the finer details of this tragedy. To me, this can be looked at in one of two ways. The first is a slightly disappointing outlook, a quick side quest that adds quantity over quality, a simple bounty hunting mission that wasn't very fleshed out. Or it can leave the player with a curious outlook. You can create your own headcanon and fill in the gaps with whatever you see fit. Maybe Zale murdered Aranahi in cold blood, maybe it was out of jealousy for Coropoli. There's a beauty in adding in your own concepts to this game, and whether that was Bethesda's intention or not is up for debate. One thing's for sure though, it's quite poetic that Zale died the same way that Aaron did. He invited a stranger into his home and showed them hospitality. I'd love to know your thoughts on these quests down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring.